Rink White, Jeff Paterson is our Vancouver Canucks reporter, and there's been plenty to report this week. Jeff, how we doing?
Yeah, doing all right. Kind of feels a little odd to have an extra day between games. You get into that rhythm of every other, but a little break for the Vancouver Canucks before that final game, before the big break, the All-Star break. So one to go here against Columbus on Saturday night.
Jeff, they're 8-0-2 in their last 10 games, so there's been a lot of adversity to talk about here, which is, and I say that tongue kind of in cheek, but it is true. If they're 8-0-2, and it does feel like they are facing a level, not a huge level, but a level of adversity for some reason. Don't you think?
Have you forgotten the last 10 years? Come on. A coach says I need better from one player is adversity now.
So do they pull themselves out of it for this final game?
I think so. They better. I think it would make everybody's All-Star break just feel a little bit more comfortable as well. Look, it's a long season. They probably reached their apex out in the New York area when they rolled through the Devils, the Rangers, and the Islanders, and they looked confident, and it was a barnstorming part of that 7-game road trip, and they couldn't be stopped. Since then, yeah, there have been some warts that have crept into their game, and in a market like this one, everything gets covered with a fine-tooth comb, and if Elias Pettersson goes a couple of games without scoring, it is a story with a small s. It's more of a story when the coach says, I haven't liked his game for 3 or 4 now. Like, even Rick Tocchet has to understand in a market like this one, when the coach says something like that, that's criticism. And when a coach criticizes a star player, I don't care who you are, that is a story at some level. Now,
Vino Kessler helicopter,
exactly.
Whatever. Yes,
Use your wingers. Yeah. And so, was Rick Tochet's issue with the way that the story was characterized in the marketplace? Maybe. I have no idea how he consumes media. Like, I don't know if he's on his phone and scrolling through all the things that are said and written about his team. I don't know if they're placed in front of him. I don't know if he's talking to buddies out of market that are like, man, I hear you Rick Paterson. It sort of becomes that game of telephone, right?
It does.
And the other part of the complication in all of this is, and look, you guys understand this too, but the listeners maybe not so much, like, people write stories. Quite often, somebody else puts a headline on that story. Now we live in a world where there's a third party to all this that takes the story with the headline and then puts it out there in social media, usually with another headline. And so, is Rick Tocchet just seeing the headlines here? Are people just seeing the headlines? Are they going through the entire story? So who knows? I thought Tocchet made a little too much of an issue where he felt too much had been made of the story. And my conclusion is that we all need the All-Star break. I think that's what it boils down to.
Very good, Jeff. In my experience with pro athletes, those who do actually stay away from media, and many will tell you they do, and about half of them actually don't, it typically is a family member or someone like that.
Yeah.
Something is typically lost in translation. Tocchet seemed fixated on the word blast. I don't know who put blast in a headline or in a tweet or what have you, but I do think that blast is probably too hard and over the top for what we heard after the game against St. Louis. But you thought Elias handled himself particularly well, and we played the clips earlier in the show.
Yeah, I thought there was some maturity there. Look, Elias can be difficult. People know that, right? Like, if there's a topic that he doesn't want to touch on, he generally just kind of shuts things down and withdraws and gives you a couple of words and hopes that you move on to something else. And, he didn't seem to want to engage a ton in this idea of criticism and the coach calling him out or whatever whatever it is that we're going to agree the coach did. The coach hasn't liked his game for a couple of games now. But I thought, Elias handled it the way that I think at this stage of his career he should. He, didn't want to put it on the officials. Said, look, I watched the tape and there were a couple of things up ice that I have to do better, that I turned the puck over twice. And so I did think that there was some ownership there. And, I followed up with, okay, all of that said, do you still think you were fouled to the point that, it could have been a penalty? And he said, yeah, maybe. But, he wanted to turn the page. And I thought, good on him. It wasn't his finest moment, but he'll have a lot more good moments, and he'll help this hockey club. And I think Rick Tocchet pointed that out as well, that, this wasn't a benching. He didn't park Elias Pettersson at any point in that game. He did that to JT Miller in a game against Nashville back in October. Certainly the storylines with Andrei Kuzmenko, Nikita Zadorov was benched the other night for the game against St. Louis. And as Tocchet said, Pettersson was back at practice with a smile. I do think that they've moved on, and maybe for them, they would have preferred that there weren't these 2 days between games and we would all got back into the whole game day routine and just looked ahead here. Whatever the case, that's the way the schedule went. But I thought Elias Pettersson certainly didn't, he wasn't available after the game against St. Louis, and I'm not sure whose call that was. So I think he knew that as the central figure in the play-in question, but also the comments of the coach, that he was going to be requested to speak to the media after practice, handled it, moved on. I think we've all moved on now.
Is Ilya Mikheyev close to a benching or at least close to a demotion in the lineup?
Oh, yeah. This one's getting hard to sort of figure out because sure, you need more from Elias Pettersson, but you look around the National Hockey League and look what Nathan MacKinnon's doing, but he's got Mikko Rantanen as his running mate. You look at Kucherov in Tampa, and he's got a whole cast of characters. Edmonton, McDavid, and Draisaitl don't always play together, but a lot of the time, like, yes, you want Elias Pettersson to elevate those around him, but at some point, I think there's a cry for help from your star player as well, and it's why we keep talking about the need for a top 6 addition to this hockey club before the trade deadline. And back to your point, Blake, about, even though they're humming along, there are still issues with this group. And one of them is that Mikheyev's gone 16 games without a goal. Now, he had a chance the other night against St. Louis, and he drew a penalty in the third period. So, there were some contributions. But when you're playing it primarily with Elias Pettersson over the stretch of these games where he hasn't scored, he can't ask for more. But he's got to hold up his end of the bargain as well. And so Pettersson's got one winger that's gone 16, and the other guy on the other side, in and out of the lineup, has gone a dozen now and hasn't scored since Christmas. Like, that's a lot to ask of an elite player. And so you can sort of understand why Elias Pettersson's gone a little bit quiet here since he's had JT Miller and Brock Besser moved from his line. So as for Mikheyev, I asked Rick Tocchet, and I thought that was the other thing too, that Rick Tocchet kind of gave us that warning about, if things are going to get misconstrued, I may just shut down, and you don't want that. And then there were a couple of questions about the penalty kill. And then I came in with a question about Ilya Mikheyev. And then he gave me this great answer about Ilya Mikheyev and all the things that are missing from his game and how he's staying out too wide and, not slashing through the middle of the ice and not connected with his teammates. And, I do really appreciate and respect that from Rick Tocchet, that you ask a question and more often than not, you get an answer, and not just an answer, but you come away smarter for asking that question. And I hope we don't lose that. So,
oh gosh,
no, whatever the case with Ilya Mikheyev, like, you can't come away from many more nights saying, oh, well, he had a chance in the third period. Like, this is a bottom line business here. And he's not a 40-goal scorer. I get that. And so you go back to Ferraro's line about, a 20-goal scorer, you're going to score once every 4 games. Well, this guy's got 1 goal in 20 games now. They need more from him. And I thought it was fascinating to hear Rick Tocchet say they need him to play more like Nils Höglander. And who would have thought that the coach would hold up Nils Höglander as an example of what they need from veteran guys in this hockey club? But that's sort of where we are in this program right now.
Honestly, I think Rick Tocchet has communicated to this specific market as masterfully as any Canucks coach in my tenure.
And I hope he doesn't.
Alain was very good at one point, but like for me, Rick is above and beyond because of what you say, Jeff, that he's willing basically to teach us all a thing or two about hockey. And also, I just don't think he can help himself.
Yeah,
I think it's a bit of a hollow threat because I think he just loves
he likes to do it.
Talking hockey and talking hockey with an audience and knowing that his views will be.
Unless word came from above him and said, you got to stop talking about Elias Pettersson, but I don't
Well, that's the other thing we were kicking around on yesterday's show, Jeff. Management has said what they want to say to message mostly to the fan base we want them and we're trying here. Now Tocchet talks should they now just shut up about Elias?
Again, I think that goes back to Rick Tocchet can't help himself. Farhan asked him a direct question about Pettersson's performance. He gave an honest response. PJ followed up with, what do you need to see more? And that's when he said he needs to skate. And so, I don't think this was messaging from above. I think this was in the heat of the moment, 10 minutes after a disappointing loss where they had the frantic comeback, got back on even terms. One of the great mysteries around this team, guys, is the fact that they've been to overtime 7 times and they've won twice. Like, with the star power that they're able to throw over the boards, they should do better than winning 2 of every 7 games that go beyond regulation time. Now, you get to the playoffs, 3-on-3, shootouts, none of that really matters. But I just think on talent and the options that they have, that is a surprising statistic to me that they haven't been able to put the dagger in with that much time and space and with that much talent at their disposal. And I suppose every team's got enough high-end skill that you're going to have opportunities both ways. And you think back the other night, like Philip Hronek had that great chance. If he wins there, that's what you play overtime for, is to create the grade A look. You just have to finish. They didn't. And then you leave it to chance. And in 2 of those overtimes, Pettersson, I think, has a legitimate case that he has been wronged without a call, and the Rangers scored on them, and the other night, St. Louis. So I think some of that was just, in the moment, Rick Tocchet a little frustrated that his star player turned the puck over. Ultimately, it wound up in the back of their net, and he was asked a direct question, and he gave a direct answer.
Zadorov's benching in the third. He comes with an obvious 6-player core right now on the blue line. We've at different points in the season prioritized, no, they need a right shot defenseman. No, they need a top 6 forward, and people seem to be in the top 6 forward camp right now. But I do think they're still going to add to the blue line core before the playoffs begin. And let's say, and we'll need to know exactly the person that they acquire, but let's say it's a certified number 5, maybe certified number 6 defenseman. Who's, when they're healthy, fully healthy? Because Juulsen's the most obvious answer in the current scenario, but Soucy's back in the lineup under the hypothetical here.
Yeah.
Who's the player that drops out? Is it Zadorov? Is it Myers, who's the common whipping boy in years gone by? Who drops out of the lineup? Because Zadorov's a left-handed shot. I don't know that they drop out the righty in Myers.
I don't think at this stage Tyler Myers is a consideration to come out of the lineup.
No.
I'm a little disappointed disappointed for Soucy that he's hurt again, but also, we saw load management once, the game on Long Island, and I wanted to see, as the season progressed here, was that a road that they were prepared to go down more than once? And if so, who was going to be next up? And would it always be Ian Cole, or would somebody else come out of the lineup? Now, with the injury to Soucy, that sort of forced their hand here. Interesting, and we've seen this before too with Rick Tocchet. They benched Zadorov 10 minutes before practice starts yesterday. There's Rick Tocchet in the corner, one-on-one with Nikita Zadorov, kind of working through some things. Now, usually Adam Foote is the one that's hands-on with the defenseman, but Rick Tocchet, obviously the buck stops with him as the head coach. And so I just thought, again, there's teaching moments here. The communication is open, trying to, I think, head this off before it becomes any sort of issue. But look, Nikita Zadorov needs a contract for next season, right? And I think the way that they handle him down the stretch here may provide us some tells about what they think of him as an organization, how much he plays. And then I thought it was fascinating, too, that as practice unfolds, now Zadorov's paired with Noah Juulsen essentially on the third pair, and they've moved Ian Cole to a partnership with Tyler Myers. So it's a full off day for them here on Friday, and we'll see how they line up against the Columbus Blue Jackets on Saturday night. But ultimately, it may turn out that it wasn't just benching, that it's a bit of a demotion for Nikita Zadorov, too. And look, he was pretty weak on 2 of those St. Louis goals. Like, he's one of the biggest bodies they've got. He has to bring a physical element. He has, but, it can't just be here and there. And you can't have guys stand on the ground in the blue paint unscathed and untouched and allowing guys to get to the front of the net. That's part of why he was acquired. And so it's been a bit of a mixed bag. I think he's had some nice moments for this hockey club, but I still think organizationally, they're probably not sold on committing to him in terms of big money and any sort of significant term here. So I think that this is still very much a work in progress.
I disagree with the premise, Blake.
What's that?
Well, that they're that they're going to add a 5'6" defenseman. I think you're looking at a 7'8" defenseman, and it's because they only have finite cap dollars. And again, we have talked about not wanting to subtract from the lineup. So I just see another depth guy coming in, and you'll have Juulsen as your depth guy on the right and a depth guy on the left. Now, look, Tanev is such a wild card here because he's so beloved, because Hughes has gone to management and said, hey, we love this guy. So I get that part of it. But unless there's a sensible Chris Tanev deal to be made, I'm looking more at a depth guy. Jeff, I don't know how you see it.
I think that they have proven that this defense by committee, that the committee is pretty good. The committee is pretty strong, particularly when Thatcher Demko is at the top of his game. And, all of this is predicated on full health, and there's no guarantees there. But Carson Soucy's injury should certainly permit him to get a bunch of games in before the playoffs begin. And the hope is that he's left the injury bug behind. I still think that, based on some of the things that we said earlier, the Elias Pettersson struggles on his own, the issues around Mikheyev and Kuzmenko, like, to me, the hot button is a top 6 forward. And if they have cap space and if they've got the capital that can help them add a depth defender as well, like there's nothing wrong with having a wish list, but there are parameters, and I just don't know that they can tick off every box there. So to me, the primary need for this hockey club right now is one more scoring forward. And then if they can, yeah, I would agree with you. And I think, Matt, you're probably right that it's you're looking at probably a veteran guy that understands why he's being acquired and is prepared to play, but also would be prepared to be an extra on a lot of nights here moving forward. So we'll see where it goes. Mark Friedman's sort of an intriguing character to me in that he's here, but they haven't shown any inclination to playing him since Zadorov. He hasn't played since the Vegas game on November 30th, I think it was. They got him down to Abbotsford for a couple of games just to get some reps in because he is a hockey player and not just a hockey practicer. But, they've shown no indication that they've tried to get him into a game at any point here. So, I don't really know where their trust is. And they were in a bit of a pinch early in the season when they went out and they acquired him and he stepped in and he gave them a few minutes here. But, he exists, but that's kind of all he is right now is he's a person that exists on their roster. And I don't know if they feel they need an upgrade there, if they would be trying to bring in somebody that's above him on the depth chart. Of course, he's a righty, so maybe they would be looking for a little insurance over on the left side. I think they go into the deadline with a wish list, but for me, it is forwards over defensemen at this stage.
One thing to consider on the Tanev thing is he does have a 10-team no-trade list. Now, we don't know when that gets asked for and provided. But if you wanted to,
I hope they have that sorted for this deadline, given what happened last year with the Senators.
But often it's in the moment they ask for a 10-team no trade, and if he can guide that, he can block a lot of logical destinations and funnel, the Flames to the Canucks effectively, and say, like he can knock off almost every playoff team and put them on the list. And if they want anything for Chris Tanev as a pending UFA, he can drive the price down a little.
We'll note.
Can we reverse engineer that Thanksgiving weekend of a few years ago coming out of COVID? Can they bring back Chris Tanev and Tyler Toffoli?
Right.
Can they make that work?
That would be perfect.
We should also note Tanev and his missus have picked up and moved their home to Toronto from Vancouver. They were here in Vancouver in his early years in Calgary, but not anymore. Lastly, Jeff, our poll question: who's the better team right now? Edmonton, Vancouver?
I know the hotter team, and that's saying something given the Canucks record of late, but it is interesting. I mean, this Oilers win streak is fascinating because, as lots of people have pointed out, they've beaten nobody essentially, but those are all the teams that have been scheduled. And this is what excites me, guys, about coming out of the All-Star break is there is so much meat on the bone for the Vancouver Canucks, but also for all these other teams in the Derby here. And so there is just going to be nightly heavyweight matches essentially in the Western Conference, basically from the All-Star break to the end of the season. Canucks are going to be involved in a bunch of them. But look, the Oilers seem to have shored up the goaltending. Again, they haven't faced a murderer's row here, but Stuart Skinner, the numbers there are undeniable. And, I guess I thought maybe they had solved their goaltending before the season, and then we know that they ran into issues, but Skinner seems to have regained his confidence and his role there. I think what's different, and I'm not sure how closely people have been paying attention to what the Oilers are up to, the win total obviously jumps off the page, but it's the fact that it's not like Connor McDavid with 50 points on this win streak that, he's contributing on a nightly basis, but Warren Fogel's had a nice run, and
Ryan McLeod.
Yeah. And so, it's kind of like the Canucks here that, their top end guys are driving, but they're getting some depth scoring that people question. Could they, would they? The defense is still, I think, a little bit of the position that's in the crosshairs there, but they're not giving up much. So it's we're in Vancouver. We cover the Canucks. I'll cast my vote for the Canucks, but it certainly feels like any lengthy success in the playoffs is going to run through the Edmonton Oilers at some point. And what a fascinating matchup that will be, and what a time it'll be to be alive if the Canucks and the Oilers are on a collision course in the postseason. So the Oilers are the hotter team right now, and then they've got I think they've got one more before the break, and then they're in Vegas their first game out of the All-Star break to try to keep that win streak alive. So when I talk about these big games, there's one of them right off the hop coming out of the All-Star break, the Golden Knights and the Oilers.
Well, think of it this way, guys. We've talked so much about all the goals the Vancouver Canucks have scored this year. In fact, a lot of them against the Edmonton Oilers. They got the 4 guys who are point per game players right now. Vancouver does, or right in that neighborhood. Well, in fact, yes, all of them over 4 points per game in Miller, Besser, Pettersson, and Hughes. Edmonton has 3 guys who are above a point per game, and then they have Bouchard and Nugent Hopkins who are right on the cusp of being point per game players. So think of that, Jeff. 9 guys potentially in a playoff series who are all a point per game over the regular season. It could be.
Well, and just a quick note too, when the schedule came out, and obviously the Canucks took advantage of the Oilers 3 times in the first dozen games. The other thing too is the Los Angeles Kings got off to that great start. The Canucks don't see the Kings until February 29th, and then they've got 4 left. Like, the timing couldn't have worked out any better, getting the Oilers when they were down and then avoiding the Kings when they were at the top of their game. And now all of a sudden, the Kings can't win a game to save themselves. So those may turn out to be softer games on the schedule than anybody would have anticipated, even sort of up to Christmas.
Marvelous stuff, Jeff. We'll be listening to Rinkwide after Saturday's game against Columbus, and we'll catch up with you on Monday.
Have a great weekend.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.